When you picture the rolling green hills of Ireland, what comes to mind? Perhaps it is the ancient stone circles standing guard over misty fields, or the lively sound of traditional music spilling from a village pub. It is a land famed for its poets, its saints, and its scholars. But what if I told you that this small island, nestled on the edge of the Atlantic, has a deep and powerful connection to the world's most desolate and frozen landscapes? It seems impossible, a story from a forgotten book. Yet, the history of polar exploration is filled with the names of Irishmen who traded their green homeland for a world of unrelenting white. They were men who answered a silent call from the icy wilderness, leaving an indelible mark on the very ends of the earth. The story of Ireland is often told through its struggles for independence, its rich literary heritage, and the vast diaspora that has spread its culture across the globe. We rarely associate this temperate, rain-soaked island with the brutal, sunless winters of the Arctic Circle. The very idea feels like a contradiction. How could men from a land without glaciers or polar bears become masters of the ice? This is the question that lies at the heart of a forgotten chapter of history. It is a tale of incredible bravery, resilience, and a spirit of adventure that refuse to be contained by the familiar shores of home. These are the stories that have remained buried for too long, like ships locked in the polar ice. The link between Ireland and the Arctic is not just a footnote in the grand saga of exploration, it is a central thread woven into the fabric of the heroic age. These Irish explorers were not mere participants, they were leaders, innovators, and survivors who pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. They ventured into the unknown, facing down starvation, frostbite, and the crushing psychological weight of isolation. Their journeys were driven by a thirst for knowledge, a hunger for discovery, and a quiet determination that seems quintessentially Irish. Their stories belong not just to the annals of polar history, but to the very soul of Ireland itself. Imagine for a moment a young man from County Kildare or County Louth looking out at the sea. He dreams not of the lands to the south, but of the vast, empty spaces on the map marked unexplored. He feels a pull towards the magnetic north, a place of myth and legend, a realm of perpetual ice. This was the reality for a select group of remarkable individuals. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected of places. It is time to pull back the curtain of snow and ice to reveal the unsung heroes of Ireland and their incredible adventures in the frozen north. Their journey is our journey, a discovery of a hidden part of our shared past. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more content like this. For generations, the grand narrative of polar exploration has been dominated by a handful of famous names. We hear of the Norwegian Roald Amundsen, the first to the South Pole. We know of the tragic, but noble, figure of Britain's Robert Falcon Scott. These men have rightly been celebrated for their courage and their contributions, yet this focus has often cast a long shadow, obscuring the pivotal roles played by others. It is a story told with missing pages, and many of those pages were written by Irishmen. It is time to challenge this narrow view and recognize that some of the most critical breakthroughs in polar history came from these unexpected heroes from the Emerald Isle. The common belief is that polar exploration was an exclusively English or Scandinavian pursuit. It was seen as the domain of great naval powers with long traditions of maritime dominance. But history is rarely so simple. Hidden within the crews of these famous expeditions, and often at their very helm, were men of Irish birth or heritage. They brought with them a unique perspective, a resilience forged by a history of hardship and an unyielding tenacity. These were not just sailors following orders, they were pioneers who shaped the course of discovery, whose decisions meant the difference between life and death in the most hostile environment on the planet. Think of the skills required to survive in the Arctic. It demanded more than just brute strength or naval discipline. It required immense patience, the ability to innovate under pressure, and a deep well of inner fortitude. These are qualities that run deep in the Irish character. Men like Francis Leopold McClintock and a young Ernest Shackleton embodied these traits. They were not simply adventurers, they were masters of their craft. They developed new techniques for sledge travel, they learned from the indigenous Inuit peoples, and they led their men through unimaginable challenges. Their contributions were not minor, they were fundamental to the progress of Arctic exploration. So, we must ask ourselves why these names are not as famous as they should be. Perhaps their Irish origins made them outsiders in the largely English establishment of the Royal Navy. Perhaps their stories were simply overshadowed by the more dramatic tales of success and failure that captured the public's imagination. Whatever the reason, the time has come to correct the record. By bringing these unsung heroes into the light, we do not diminish the achievements of others. Instead, we enrich the story, making it more complete, more honest, and ultimately, more inspiring for everyone. Ireland's polar pioneers deserve their place in the pantheon of great explorers. Long before the names Shackleton or Scott became legendary, there was another titan of the ice. His name was Francis Leopold McClintock, and he was born in Dundalk, County Louth in 1819. He was a man whose methodical genius and quiet determination would forever change the face of Arctic exploration. McClintock was not a flamboyant leader who sought fame, but a meticulous and pragmatic officer in the Royal Navy. His name is synonymous with one of the greatest maritime mysteries of the 19th century, the search for the lost Franklin expedition. He was the man who would finally uncover the tragic fate of Sir John Franklin and his 128 men, a quest that had baffled the world for over a decade. McClintock joined the Royal Navy at the tender age of 12, a common practice in those days. His early career was steady but unremarkable. However, his life's purpose was forged in the ice when he joined the first of several expeditions to search for the missing ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. On these initial voyages, he served under other commanders, but he quickly distinguished himself as an expert in a crucial skill: sledge travel. While others struggled with heavy, poorly designed sledges, McClintock studied, adapted, and innovated. He understood that the key to unlocking the Arctic was not just by sea, but by land, across the vast, frozen ocean. His dedication to perfecting the art of sledging was relentless. He experimented with different designs, reduced weights, and organized his teams with scientific precision. He developed a system of depots, pre-placing supplies along a route to allow for longer and more extensive journeys. This methodical approach, which became known as the McClintock system, revolutionized Arctic travel. It allowed small teams of men to cover vast distances that were previously unimaginable. He turned sledge journeys from desperate short-range dashes into organized, strategic explorations. McClintock was not just an explorer, he was an Arctic scientist and a logistical visionary. This quiet man from Dundalk was a true pioneer. He combined the discipline of a naval officer with the practical ingenuity of an engineer. He learned from the successes and failures of those who came before him and systematically built a new way of operating in the polar regions. His reputation grew with each expedition, and he became the go-to man for Arctic expertise. McClintock's journey from a young boy in County Louth to the world's foremost authority on polar travel is a powerful story of dedication. He laid the groundwork for all who would follow, a true unsung hero of the ice. While McClintock was the master of the old school, a new generation of explorer was rising, and among them was a man whose name would become a byword for leadership and survival: Ernest Shackleton. Born in 1874 in Kilkea, County Kildare, Shackleton was Irish to his core. Though he moved to London as a boy, he retained a romantic and adventurous spirit that many attributed to his Irish roots. He was not a naval man like McClintock. Instead, he came from the merchant navy, a background that gave him a more practical, hands-on approach to leadership. He was a born leader of men, possessing a charm and charisma that could inspire loyalty in the most dire of circumstances. Shackleton's heart was not initially set on the Arctic, but on the vast, unconquered continent of Antarctica. He famously served on Captain Scott's Discovery expedition, but his journey was cut short by illness, a perceived failure that would fuel his ambition for the rest of his life. However, before his legendary Antarctic expeditions, Shackleton had to prove his mettle elsewhere. His early polar ambitions were not solely focused on the South. Like many explorers of his time, he saw the polar regions, both North and South, as the final frontier for human discovery. The Arctic was a crucial training ground, a place to test his ideas and hone his skills before taking on the ultimate prize of the South Pole. His early life was a constant search for adventure. He grew tired of the routine of merchant voyages and was drawn to the grand, heroic tales of exploration that filled the newspapers. The call of the unknown was irresistible to him. Shackleton was a dreamer, but he was also a pragmatist. He understood that dreams required funding, planning, and the right team. His Irish charm was a powerful tool in the drawing rooms of London, where he persuaded wealthy backers to finance his audacious plans. He could sell his vision of glory and discovery like no other, convincing others to believe in him as much as he believed in himself. This blend of romanticism and pragmatism is what set Shackleton apart. He was a poet at heart, but a brilliant logistician in practice. He understood the psychology of his men, knowing when to drive them and when to encourage them with a joke or a kind word. His path to the Arctic was not a straight line, but a winding road, driven by an insatiable hunger for greatness. The boy from Kildare was destined to leave his home far behind. He was preparing to step onto the world stage, not just as an explorer, but as one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. His journey into the ice was just beginning. To understand the achievements of these Irish explorers, we must first appreciate the sheer brutality of the world they chose to enter. The Arctic is not merely a cold place, it is an alien environment, actively hostile to human life. Imagine for a moment, a world where temperatures plummet to minus 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, a cold so intense it can freeze exposed skin in seconds. This is a cold that makes metal brittle, that turns even simple tasks into monumental struggles, and that seeps into your very bones, no matter how many layers you wear. It is honestly a constant draining battle just to stay warm, a fight that consumes energy and saps the will to live. Navigation was a nightmare. In a landscape of endless, shifting ice, there were few reliable landmarks. The magnetic compass, a sailor's most trusted friend, becomes erratic and untrustworthy so close to the magnetic North Pole. Explorers had to rely on the sun and stars, but for months on end, during the polar winter, the sun never rises. They were plunged into a perpetual darkness, a disorienting twilight that played tricks on the mind. Getting lost was not an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. To chart a course through this featureless frozen desert required immense skill, patience, and, well, a little bit of luck. Survival was a daily struggle for the most basic necessities. Food was a constant obsession. The rations they brought with them were monotonous and often insufficient, leading to the dreaded disease of scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C. Hunting for seals or polar bears was essential, but it was also dangerous and unreliable. The threat of starvation was a constant companion, a gnawing fear that haunted every waking moment. Beyond hunger, there was the ice itself. The sea ice could trap a ship for years, its immense pressure capable of crushing a wooden hull like a nutshell, as many unfortunate crews discovered. The psychological toll was perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Imagine being trapped on a ship or in a tiny hut for months, surrounded by the same few faces, with no contact with the outside world. The isolation was profound. The endless darkness of the polar night, the constant howling of the wind, and the ever-present danger created an atmosphere of intense psychological pressure. It took a special kind of mental fortitude to endure these conditions without succumbing to despair or madness. This was the crucible that forged heroes, a world of ice and peril that tested the very limits of human endurance. Francis Leopold McClintock's greatest contribution to Arctic history was born from its greatest tragedy. In 1857, he was given command of the yacht Fox, a vessel privately funded by Lady Jane Franklin, who just refused to give up hope of finding her husband. This was McClintock's moment. He set sail on a mission that was, honestly, part search and rescue, part detective story. For 2 years, he and his crew battled the ice, meticulously following every clue. They were not just searching for men, they were searching for answers. McClintock applied his systematic sledging techniques with incredible success, sending out parties to travel thousands of miles across the frozen wilderness. The breakthrough came in 1859. One of McClintock's sledging parties, led by Lieutenant William Hobson, discovered a cairn on King William Island. Inside was a small tin cylinder containing a note. It was the Rosetta Stone of the Franklin mystery. The note, written by Franklin's officers, gave the location where the Erebus and Terror had been trapped in the ice since 1846. It recorded the date of Sir John Franklin's death and the desperate decision of the surviving crew to abandon their ships and attempt an overland trek to safety. McClintock's methodical search had finally yielded the terrible truth. The world now knew the fate of the lost expedition. McClintock's discoveries did not end there. As his teams explored the coastline of King William Island, they came across harrowing evidence of the crew's final days. They found skeletons, abandoned equipment, and personal belongings scattered along the path of the doomed march. One particularly poignant discovery was a longboat, mounted on a heavy sledge, containing 2 skeletons and a collection of strangely useless items, like silk, handkerchiefs, and slippers. McClintock's detailed reports, delivered with sensitivity and respect, painted a vivid and heartbreaking picture of the men's desperate struggle for survival against impossible odds. He brought closure to a mystery that had haunted the nation. In solving the Franklin mystery, McClintock did more than just find answers. His expedition mapped vast new stretches of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The charts he and his officers created filled in huge blank spaces on the world map. His perfection of sledge travel became the standard for all future polar exploration, used by Peary, Amundsen, and Scott. Though his mission was one of tragedy, his triumph was in his method, his perseverance, and his dedication to the truth. The quiet man from Dundalk had not only solved a great mystery, but had also provided the tools for the next generation of explorers to push even further into the frozen world. While Ernest Shackleton is forever linked with the Antarctic, his ambitions were not always so singularly focused. His early career shows a man captivated by the allure of both polar regions. Before he would lead his own famous expedition south, he gained valuable experience that was deeply influenced by the challenges of the North. His involvement in the planned 1901 Anglo-Swedish Arctic expedition, though it never came to fruition, shows his early interest in the northern ice. He saw the Arctic as a theater where he could test his theories on leadership, equipment, and survival, a crucial stepping stone on his path to greatness. Shackleton was a keen student of polar history. He devoured the accounts of previous explorers, including the detailed reports of his fellow Irishman, Francis McClintock. He understood the vital importance of McClintock's sledging techniques and the lessons learned from the Franklin disaster. Shackleton was different from many of his contemporaries in the Royal Navy. He was more willing to adopt and adapt. He saw the value in learning from the Inuit, particularly their use of dog teams and their superior fur clothing. This willingness to embrace new ideas, rather than sticking rigidly to naval tradition, would become a hallmark of his leadership style. Although he never led a major expedition purely to the Arctic, his planned but unrealized journey to the North Pole in the early 1900s reveals his thinking. He intended to use a combination of dog sledges and the newly invented motor sledges, showing his innovative spirit. He planned to drift with a ship locked in the ice, a technique pioneered by the Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen. Shackleton's mind was always working, always looking for an edge, a new way of tackling the immense challenges of polar travel. The Arctic was his mental gymnasium, where he worked out the strategies he would later deploy with legendary success in the Antarctic. This period of his life was his Arctic apprenticeship. It was a time of planning, learning, and absorbing the hard-won knowledge of those who had gone before him. It shaped his philosophy of exploration, which prioritized the safety of his men above all else. The stories of crews starving or freezing to death in the Arctic, particularly the Franklin tragedy, left a deep impression on him. This is where the seeds of his famous promise were sown that he would get all his men home alive. His quest for endurance was honed by the ghosts of the Arctic, preparing him for the ultimate test that awaited him on the other side of the world. The contributions of Ireland's polar explorers were not fleeting moments of glory. They fundamentally changed the world's understanding of the Arctic. Before men like McClintock, the far north was a place of myth and speculation, a vast blank on the map filled with terrifying legends of sea monsters and a mythical open polar sea. These Irish pioneers, through their courage and scientific rigor, replaced fantasy with fact. They ventured into the unknown and returned with charts, geological samples, and meteorological data that laid the foundations for modern Arctic science. They were not just adventurers, they were geographers and scientists. McClintock's mapping of the Canadian Arctic was a monumental achievement. His expeditions charted hundreds of miles of previously unknown coastline, finally proving the existence of a complex network of islands and channels in what is now the Canadian Arctic archipelago. This was crucial knowledge. It dispelled the long-held theory of an open polar sea and provided a much more accurate picture of the region's geography. His work was so precise that many of his charts remained in use for decades. He literally redrew the map of the world, carving a legacy into the ice that endures to this day. Beyond geography, these explorers contributed to a deeper understanding of survival in extreme environments. McClintock's refinement of sledging techniques became the textbook method for polar travel, enabling explorers to journey further and more safely than ever before. The lessons Shackleton absorbed from Arctic survival strategies, such as the use of furs and dog teams, influenced his own expeditions and became part of the collective wisdom of polar exploration. They demonstrated that with the right preparation, innovation, and leadership, humans could endure and even thrive in the most inhospitable place on Earth. Their achievements deserve to be recognized as a vital part of polar history. These were not minor players. They were central figures who solved great mysteries, pioneered new methods, and expanded the boundaries of the known world. The names of islands, channels, and capes in the Arctic still bear witness to their presence. McClintock Channel, for example, is a major waterway named in his honor. Their legacy is written on the landscape itself. To overlook their contributions is to misunderstand how the Arctic was truly opened up to the world, a process in which Irishmen played a leading and honorable role. The stories of Francis McClintock, Ernest Shackleton, and the many other Irishmen who braved the polar wastes are more than just historical footnotes. They are powerful testaments to an enduring spirit of adventure, resilience, and quiet courage. These men came from a small island on the edge of Europe, yet they set their sights on the very ends of the earth. Their legacy is not just in the maps they drew or the mysteries they solved, but in the powerful example they set. They prove that the human capacity for exploration and endurance knows no national boundaries. It is a universal spirit that can be found in the most unexpected of places. Today, as we look back on their journeys from the comfort of our modern world, it is easy to forget the sheer scale of their bravery. They sailed in small wooden ships into a world of crushing ice, with no GPS, no satellite phones, and no chance of a quick rescue. They faced darkness, cold, and starvation, with a fortitude that is almost impossible to comprehend. They were driven by science, by national pride, and by a deeply personal need to push beyond the horizon. Their names deserve to be spoken with the same reverence as the most famous explorers in history, for their struggles and their triumphs were just as great. The spirit of these forgotten heroes lives on. It is found in the Irish scientists who today study climate change in the polar regions, in the adventurers who still feel the pull of the wilderness, and in the everyday person who dares to dream big and overcome challenges in their own life. The echoes of their footsteps in the snow remind us of what is possible when determination is matched with courage. They challenge us to look beyond the familiar and to question the accepted narratives of history, to search for the unsung heroes who have been left in the shadows. Let us remember them. Let us say their names and tell their stories. Sir Francis Leopold McClintock of Dundalk, who gave the world answers, Ernest Shackleton of Kildare, who taught the world about leadership, and Tom Crean of Annaskall, the Antarctic giant. These men, and others like them, are Ireland's polar heroes. They traded the 40 shades of green for an unforgiving world of white, and in doing so, they left a legacy that is as vast and as timeless as the ice itself. Their names should not be forgotten, for they are a vital and inspiring part of Ireland's story, and the world's.